All right. Hello, guys. I am so excited to have you back for another episode of The Reminder Remedy. If you are tuning in on the podcast, welcome back. If you are on our brand new YouTube channel, you already know what I'm going to say. Hit that button and subscribe because today, for the first time ever, y'all, we have a registered dietitian on the line. We have Tamar Samuels. Welcome to the show and the channel.
Thanks, Alena. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So let's get into it because I have been following you since I was introduced to your platform. And I'm going to be honest, like, I have a love hate relationship with food. Like, it is my nemesis. It is something that I think has impacted me more obviously as an adult. But I would say in this last year and a half more than ever because I feel like I'm getting to that age where things that I used to do in terms of like losing weight and like snapping back after a baby and all of that, like just doesn't work anymore. I also feel like I've spent a lot of my life trying to figure out what works for me. So whether that's like a new diet or a new fad, or right now I told my sister I'm doing intuitive eating, like I'll just let the spirit lead me. So I would love to hear from you, like a little bit about, your story, kind of how you decided to become a dietitian and just like even your relationship with food and nutrition.
Yeah, I think that your story actually echoes so many people's feelings about food and nutrition. So I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics. I actually didn't know that being a dietitian was actually a career. I kind of stumbled upon it. I wanted to be a therapist, and now I'm a food therapist. But I initially wanted to be a therapist, and I was working in an after-school program with kids, and actually ended up leading a nutrition class because I was always just passionate about, the intersection of food and health specifically. I actually secret don't love to cook. So I know a lot of dietitians get into this space because they really like cooking and food. I don't love cooking, but I do love nutrition science. So that's kind of how I started in this space. I had a personal journey of really struggling with a lot of like uncomfortable GI symptoms. So I had like several like recurring GI issues, chronic, constipation and bloating. I was diagnosed with like this thing called small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which stands for SIBO, which is really more common now. But I was diagnosed with that, almost 10 years ago, and kind of have always used food as a way to manage my own personal health. Although I wouldn't recommend kind of DIYing it because it ended up really affecting my relationship with food, as you touched on earlier, and really just feeling like kind of food was my enemy, right? Like every time I ate, I felt really uncomfortable and scared and unsure of like whether or not it was contributing to me just feeling unwell. And then that produced a ton of anxiety. And then I had an even more strained relationship with food. And so that's kind of how I got into this space. I in search of like healing myself, I realized that this was a career that you can have, and I immediately got my master's degree, got my credential, and here I am.
I love it. Yes, kudos to that whole journey because I'm thanking you in advance for the work that you're doing because it is just so needed. And I think that when I think about a nutritionist and even a dietitian back in the day, it was just like, oh, this is just somebody that comes in and teaches us about like the food pyramid in school, and then like that's really all we know about them, unless you then get diagnosed with like a chronic disease or like your parent does, and you're like, all of a sudden we got to figure out what we're gonna feed mom and grandma to get them back healthy, right? But for me, similar to you, I I just feel like depending on what I eat, it significantly impacts every area of my life. So it's impacting my food, I mean, not my food, my sleep, my mood, my skin. I have always had like different digestive issues,
Mm-hmm.
hemorrhoids, not to be TMI, but we always TMI here. So here it is.
Love it. Put it out there. I talk about poop all day.
Right. And it's just like, oh my goodness. And then I think the other side of it is even when you attempt to eat well, you realize how much of just even the food industry is just a scam. So then it feels like, well, where do I even get real food from? And so, as someone who is looking to, number one, determine just even where to start and then how to kind of maintain it, what is the advice that you would have for us?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much misinformation out there, right? Like, I feel like the wellness industry has exploded in the last several years, and it's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry. Everybody eats, right? And people are just seeking advice about what to eat. And unfortunately, they're seeking advice from people who are not qualified. You would think that we'd all be qualified to know how to feed ourselves, but we just don't have that education. And it's really affected. What we eat and how we eat is affected by the media. I think more so than anything, right? Like, and it's a completely unregulated industry. So it's really important to be able to like lean on reputable sources of nutrition information and know that 95% of it out there just is not trustworthy. And I think even if it is trustworthy, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And I think that's where personalization really comes in. And that's like really what the work that I love to do, the work that my dietitians and my company does with our clients is really focused on evidence-based, science-based nutrition. So supporting people with their health and wellness goals from a perspective of a clinical perspective, right? You don't have to have type 2 diabetes, but this is how the human body works, right? Being able to let people know kind of what it means. Why are fruits and vegetables important? Like this is what happens when you eat these types of foods. But also make it personalized, right? Because this Instagram influencer is doing keto over here, but that's probably not going to work for you, and here's why, right? Or maybe it is going to work for you, which it probably won't, but maybe it is.
And I'm an ex-ketoer, so we're gonna definitely talk about that. When you were talking, I was literally like, oh, I gotta ask her about keto. But go ahead.
Yeah, I love talking about keto. It's such an interesting diet, but that being said, it's like if somebody else is doing it, even if it works for them, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And I think the best place to start is to like figure out where you can get reliable information from, and that reliable information will likely come from a registered dietitian, or you can go to our Instagram page or our blog. We have evidence-based blogs too. And find someone you can trust and kind of start there. And then it also kind of starts within too. So like being in touch with yourself around kind of like what's working, what isn't working, what are your preferences like for taste, for what's your lifestyle like, right? Like I have clients who come to me and they're like, I hate to cook, right? I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to give you a meal plan where you have to cook a lot, like what are your options outside of having to cook all of your meals? So kind of start with yourself and knowing what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and don't try to fit into a box. With keto, for example, it's really restrictive, right? But it also has benefits for some people because they don't have to think about anything, right? They just know that they need a lot of fat and not a lot of carbs, right? For some people, that can spiral them into an eating disorder. For other people, maybe it just feels like easy and they don't have to think about it, So kind of knowing how your brain works behaviorally, I think is really important also.
And I mean, I think that to your point, you would think that we all would know about food, but you would also think that we all know like how our brain works, but we don't, right? Like most of us are not even in tune with our real needs, which is a lot of the work that I do, which is, kind of helping people craft their life based on their values. But what I have found with 75% of my clients is in that first phase, they're having these aha moments of, oh my God, the things that I thought brought me joy, or the job that I'm doing, or the life that I'm living, like just does not align with like who I am at my core. So I think that even that part of it would probably be a challenge, right? And I can imagine it is about just like, okay, getting still and realizing like, you said that you don't like cooking, but the last time you cooked, when you think about the emotions, you realize like, oh, actually, I do like cooking. I just don't like cooking when I'm rushed and
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference, right? So I think that that's a great starting point. So if someone was to work with a dietitian though, what does that process look like? Is that blood work first, or is that weight loss goals? Like, kind of, what is that? What can they expect?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I can't speak for any other dietitians, but I can speak for all of our dietitians at Culina Health. And our process is one where we start with data, right? I think like what you were saying before is so important. Being able to tune in and understand, the subtleties of the self is
Mhm.
really important when we're trying to heal and support people. So starting with a comprehensive questionnaire that you fill out before you meet us, and asking questions like, what's your relationship with food, right? Do you have kids? Who lives in your home? What are your health conditions? What are your stress levels? What are your physical activity levels? There's so many things that impact how we eat and what we eat, and we want to know all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So we really kind of start with like diving into that stuff in our initial intake with our clients, and really just having a big picture understanding of like their overall wellness and health. And then we're a really goals driven practice. So we work with our clients to create benchmarks and goals together. We find that really helps to support behavior change and motivation, right? Like it's one thing to go on social media and look for like tips, and I think that can be helpful, but I think the reality is that like that's fleeting and it doesn't necessarily help behavior change, right? It's not just about education for us, it's about building healthy habits and creating a lifestyle where you're sustaining your results, because you can go online, you can follow a diet, it's not going to be sustainable, right? So our goal is to really like get sustainable results for our clients, and we do that by creating a personalized plan with them. And so we work with our clients to create long-term goals. Like we usually do a 3-month time frame, and we kind of collaborate on those together. And then each session we create session goals to kind of build up to those long-term goals. And then we work with our clients on creating those goals. So we're not here to say you need to lose 15 pounds. You tell me what you want, right? Like, let's say maybe you do want to lose weight, but more importantly, like you want to work on having a regular physical activity routine, and you want to work on integrating more vegetables and cooking more, right? So those are sort of the habits that we're really going to be more focused on. And then from there, we meet pretty frequently. So we meet usually every week or every other week. And we kind of hold our clients accountable. We give support, feedback, resources, everything under the sun as far as nutrition is concerned. We give you to help you reach those goals. So that's sort of our process.
Mhm.
And then again, ultimately the goal is for you to reach your goals. So that's kind of
That
our
sounds
benchmark.
that sounds very luxe. I like that that idea of that built-in accountability, because I think that that's the big piece. It's like, to your point, you can be doing it alone and then you look up and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. You're just like out, and kind
Yeah.
of having that coach. One of the things that I feel like has been, if not the number one, but the number two source of stress for me is when I make all of this effort to like write this meal plan list, then take my ass to the grocery store, almost die from COVID trying to shop, which by the way, I do Instacart now. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, I hate Instacart. Now all I do is Instacart because, but I do all of these things to be a great mom, and I prepare this meal of whole foods for my children, and then they literally don't eat it. And when I tell you that it is the most defeating thing when my kids don't eat my food, because I just, it's not something that I really even wanted to do, which was like cook this meal with, I just want to give y'all chicken nuggets and be great, but I'm trying to be responsible, and you all just complain or you walk off. So what are your, like, talk to me about food and kids. Like, how do we get them to like real food?
It's a good question. I am a new mom. My daughter is 8 months and she just started eating. Thank you. Wow, it's a journey being a mom. How old are your kids?
They are 6, 4, 2, and 10 months.
Oh, congrats for you too. Okay, so you got a full squad. I love it. I love it. Yeah, so I'm sure it's especially challenging because they're all in different phases, right?
Right.
Totally different phases. So I think, the research says that like preventing picky eating really does start from the beginning, from when you first start feeding your kids, and kind of not being afraid to experiment with different flavors and trying new things. And of course it's more work on mom, right? Like mom has to do all of the work, but introducing a variety of different food groups and flavors in the beginning helps to prevent picky eating in the long term.
Mhm.
However, that being said, a lot of kids do hit a picky eating phase, especially in like the toddler years. And so kind of, being patient with your kids, and understanding that your children get to decide, you decide what they're going to eat, and when they're going to eat. They decide how much they're going to eat. So giving them that agency to be able to say, I don't want this much, or I'm not going to eat today. Like, okay, fine. That's your agency. You can do that, right? And like being okay with that as a mom. I think getting fun with food too is really important. I mean, this is all in theory, right? Like I said, my daughter is an infant still, and so she's not talking.
Yeah.
So in
Like,
theory, this sounds good, but I know, I'm sure in real life this is a lot harder. But having fun with food is something that I think can be really helpful for younger kids to really kind of experiment with. And being able, like, we don't want to be wasteful with our food, but being able to say like, okay, like we're experimenting with food right now, let's try these new flavors, right? Like, let's just take a bite and see how that feels. It's funny because some of the pediatric nutrition talks about introducing foods up to upwards of 15 times for picky eaters,
mm,
to really like reintroduce the same foods over and over to get children more comfortable with eating those foods. And I think more importantly, like the dialogue around food, if your children are older, is really helpful. Like being able to reframe the way that we think about healthy foods, right? So a lot of parents will say like, oh, well, if you eat this broccoli, then you can get your dessert, right? And so like you're already categorizing food into like good tasty food which is not healthy,
right.
versus like well, sorry, you're categorizing food with like unhealthy tasty food, right, versus healthy non-tasty food, right? And so I think reframing that, and like reframing the way that we talk about healthy food, not just for health but also for taste, is really important too. So
Mhm.
it's tough. I mean, kids are tough. They're tough, but let go of the mom guilt. You're doing a good job.
Listen, there were two things that you said that stood out to me, and it's, once I kind of realized that them not eating was creating a source of anxiety, I'm like, I had to get in tune with where that was coming from. Was it because I felt judged, or was it because kind of in the back of my mind or subconsciously, I feel like I could just hear my mom being like, we don't waste food, right? And so that whole thing then made me be frustrated around them because they're not eating it because we don't waste food, right? So I think that, even getting to a point where if there's one, two, three bites taken and that's it, I just have to emotionally be okay with it, and not take it personally, because it can become like this moment of the day that you're just like, ugh. And then I will say that, with my first son, who is my pickiest eater, we did, the traditional baby food and a lot of the purees. And then with all of my other children, we've done like baby led weaning and starting with just like
Hmm.
whole foods. And all of them are great eaters, right? And I think that a lot of the research has suggested, that puree foods really just came with the invention of the blender, not because it really was what kids needed. And so,
Yeah.
have you done any research around just like the benefits of, non-puree versus whole foods for babies, since you're kind of in that phase now?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this because I know that it is a little bit controversial, but the baby-led feeding is definitely like there's more and more research that's saying that babies who are baby-led, or babies who come from baby-led feeding tend to be less picky eaters. However, there's like a lot of ways to do baby-led feeding. I think the goal is really self-feeding, so allowing your child to feed themselves. And so like what I'm doing with my daughter Everest is we're doing a combination of baby-led feeding and purees, because I have this like fear she's going to choke, which I'm sure a lot of parents do have. But she self-feeds, so she feeds herself, right? And so the act of actually like feeding herself is really like one of the most important goals with baby-led feeding. So I think parents can do a combination of all of these things, right? And for us, it's like we're doing all the different colors. So I'll do like beets and blueberries. I'll really experiment with some foods that come from like a variety of different textures and flavors and colors. And I think that diversity is really, really important too. But certainly, like I think parents don't like kind of get stuck like they have to do one or the other, but you can really do a combination of both and still get those same benefits. And actually, some of the research says that, of course, like allowing baby to feed themselves is important, but also just having a shared family meal helps with picky eating as well. So that's a big part of it, getting baby to sit at the table with your entire family and modeling eating helps with picky eating, preventing picky eating down the line. So that's a big part of it too. So I think just being like flexible and trying new things and experimenting is important.
I would have to agree. Having lived it, right? I think I saw somebody post that one time, like, listen, my babies have been spoon fed and they also feed themselves. My baby has had breast milk and they've also had formula. Like, you don't have to be so cultish around like, what are you doing? Right. And I think that to me, it is about having enough educate. So when it comes to these controversial subjects, especially around food and babies, I think that it's important that we have the conversation and not shy away from it because there are so many benefits, right? So like my oldest son is considered special needs, and some of the things that we dealt with were, fine motor skills being underdeveloped, and baby-led feeding really focuses on like that pincer grip, right? So some of it is like the hand-eye coordination that I watched him struggle with, with holding a pencil. And my 10-month-old can like grip anything, right? And so it's kind of like I like having the conversation with people like, okay, I know we don't want our babies to choke and we don't want to, feel like we're just doing this one way, but there are so many other things that come from texture, feel, knowing how to stop eating, right? When you're getting ready to swallow, to know that it's too much in terms of that gag reflux.
Yeah.
And so, I'm a big fan of it. And I think that, I just introduced puree for the first time because now we're trying to learn how to feed with the spoon.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you kind of have the best of both worlds, which is kind of my eating philosophy now. And now you need to help me figure this out, okay? Because listen, I have been trying. I mean, I have done everything: Weight Watchers, keto, fasting, intermittent fasting, and I know like what's important for me is I want to nourish myself with foods that help me be very high functioning in the sense of I want to be able to have all of my brain like working. Like I don't want to be groggy. I want to have I want my mood and my hormones to be stabilized, which has been an issue in the past when there's too much sugar and carbs going on. But I also want to get rid of belly fat, right? So that's like something that this time around, like the lower like mom belly, like what is happening? Like normally by my 1 year mark, this is gone. So I'm like, is it age? So I know that you don't have all of my intake forms, right? But I was a client and I'm telling you, like, come on, help a sister out. Like, what are some foods or some routines that you feel like I could do to help me get the results that I want in terms of like energy and just functioning and mood, but then also like targeting that lower belly. And I don't really work out that much. So I know I need to do that too.
So such a good question, right? I think there's so much that goes into this. It sounds like you've tried a lot. I'm curious, what, if any of those things have worked? First, that's where I would start, right? Like you have a lot of data on yourself. let's start with what has worked and what you've noticed with what has and what hasn't worked.
So keto worked the best in terms of just overall loving life. Like I had so much energy, like my skin was like giving 16 and gorgeous. Like it was just so tight. My hair was great. Like I mean, obviously you start losing weight right away, but it
Mhm.
probably was like 3-4 months into keto where I felt comfortable in my own skin. And I still had like, like I've had two C-sections and 2 vaginal births, but with my C-section, like, I still have loose skin that's just not going to go anywhere unless, I'm on somebody's table.
Unless you get under the knife again.
Exactly. So, but that was like, so like I got back to just like the size that I wanted to be in terms of clothes. But the reason why I really loved keto was because um I felt like, as you can see, I'm a high performance and productivity coach, but like it's just my state of being. I like to be on, like I just like to be happy. I like to be able to focus.
Yeah.
And I have realized that my obsession with this space is because it's not my natural space. Like I am
Mhm.
probably undiagnosed ADHD, and I see a lot of all of my stuff that's in my kids now that we're actually getting our kids diagnosed. I'm like, oh yeah, I used to deal with that as a kid, but
Like, this is abnormal? Who knew?
it's like, oh, but they were like, oh, she'll grow out of it, but whatever. So yeah, I'm not a naturally like focused person. Like I, lose attention very easily. So
Mhm.
I've always been really obsessed with just like anything that helps me kind of feel like I'm on a limitless pill, which is
Mhm.
what keto did for me. I also really liked keto because the food was delicious. Like I always felt like I was eating great food. Um, and in a perfect world, I think that I would probably do it again. The challenge for me now though is I breastfed longer, so I'm still nursing. Normally I stop breastfeeding around like 8 or 9 months.
Mhm.
And I felt like keto was, kind of messing with my supply.
Mhm.
Now, also when I did keto before, my kids, I only had 2 kids, and they weren't really eating what I ate, right? So they had their own kind of meal. We had a full-time nanny, so she was cooking for them. So I
Mhm.
didn't have to cook 2 separate meals. Me and my husband were doing keto. But then he lost all this weight, and my husband is already slim. So he was like, oh, fuck that. I'm not doing keto no more.
It always works that way. These
Right.
guys
He's like, my
know it
head looks too big.
so annoying.
So it just wasn't a good family diet
Mhm.
because nobody else was eating what I was eating. So then that's when I decided to just switch to Weight Watchers because I felt like Weight Watchers was more just like portion control. Weight Watchers, I lost good steady weight over time. So I have no issues with Weight Watcher other than the fact that this is my other issue. After like 2-3 weeks of me doing a diet, all of that built in like accountability and tracking and stuff, I'm like, oh, I can just do it in my head, right?
Mhm.
So then, like, if I've lost like say 5 pounds, I'm like, oh, I'm good. I'll just keep it in my head because it feels like so
You know
natural.
what to do.
And then
Yeah.
you look up and you're like, dang, didn't I have 30 points yesterday? And now I have 40 today. Like, sis, now next thing you know, you fat again. Whatever. I'm not gonna
Oh.
I'm not gonna say that. Let's disregard that because I know y'all gonna come for me. Alena, love yourself. I do love myself, but that's just how
But you
it
gotta keep it tight. I got it. Gotta keep it right,
so
keep it tight.
yeah, so it's like the keto was my favorite. Weight Watchers is probably the most sustainable. And
Mhm.
then now I am kind of just in this space where I just am making healthy choices.
Mhm.
But I just don't feel like I'm able to get rid of my belly. So it's making me want to go aggressive. But my fear is like when I go aggressive, it's not sustainable. Cause then I'm like, but I do eventually want to eat sugar, So it's like I like the space that I am in right now because I feel like it's very mind, body, soul connection in
Mhm.
terms of like, okay, like I got a cabinet full of Oreos and I would never touch them right now because I just don't desire them and it's not what the kind of food that I want. So I'm eating well, but I'm not really losing weight. So I'm
Yeah.
feeling like what the hell?
Have you gained the weight back? So it sounds like you try a lot of diets. Do you lose the weight and then gain it back?
Oh, I always get pregnant. Every
I
time.
love
So
you.
that is what happens, okay? Because when you start losing weight,
Looking good, feeling good.
the hormones and the serotonin, everything, the dopamine, like you just in like, oh, I feel good, I look sexy. There's a lot more sex when you're smaller and feeling fit, and then you just get pregnant again. So that has been literally my life.
Yeah,
Every
that's
like,
so
as soon as I
funny.
lose weight, I get pregnant. So, and maybe
Wow.
that's a subconscious thing. Maybe I don't want to get pregnant, so I'm just staying big. I just had a revelation.
I'm done. I mean, look, there's something real about that, right? Like I said before, food is influenced by so many different things, and there's certainly like a huge psychology behind a lot of these things. It sounds like, I mean, I think you're in a good place right now with really like kind of being more in touch with what you need and trying to work on something that's more sustainable. Diets are short-term solutions, and they're not even solutions because oftentimes people lose weight and then they gain it back and some. So it's not something that I recommend doing. I think that we need to find something for you that's actually sustainable in the long term. You probably won't get the same results that you would get from keto as far as like these extreme, like it results in a very short period of time. But maybe find something that's a little bit more practical than like counting points in an app, right? I think you need to find a happy medium. And I think for you, that would really start with like a combination of something that's like a little bit lower in carbohydrates, but not a full ketogenic diet, right? Like manipulating carbohydrates is important for weight loss. That doesn't mean that you need to be on keto in order for you to lose weight. However, carbohydrates do have a big impact on our hormones, our appetite, right? And certain carbs actually make us crave more carbohydrates. And so, like, it's about choosing the right type of carbs at the right time and the right amount. So I would really work with you on that, right? You can be eating a really healthy diet, but it's possible that you could just be eating, too many calories, right? And you don't, or too many carbohydrates, and you don't need to count these things in order for you to modify that. You can kind of like think about your diet overall in a day and then work on kind of modifying like one thing at a time to see how you feel, right? Like if you're having oatmeal for breakfast and a grain bowl for lunch and like bean pasta for dinner, even if there's vegetables included in all of these things, it might just be not enough protein, too many carbohydrates to help to like fuel you appropriately. And so we kind of work on like modifying that and kind of leaning on other types of carbs to support you at the right time. I'm not gonna lie, you gotta exercise if you want to see some results in the core. It's definitely diet, but you have to move too. So that I think is really important to think about. Also from like a mental health perspective, like you're a busy mom of 4, but it sounds like you also have a lot of energy, and exercise really helps to support mental clarity and also even more energy. So I think, and it's, a great form of self-care also, and would be just like a great way for you to optimize. I know it sounds like that's your goal, right? Like you just want to optimize the time that you do.
Optimization, that's
Yeah.
literally my word. It's like, how can I optimize this? And it's so interesting because when me and my husband first started dating, like I was like a workout bunny. Like it was a season. And I think I've shared this on other episodes. After having, so I got pregnant right before we got married. And so then I had all of this pressure to lose my baby weight before my wedding. So
Mm,
I did all of the diets and I did this. I had a trainer who was just like really hard on me. And I felt like I deal with some post traumatic stress around
yeah.
diet and exercise because in my mind, I still haven't undone the trauma of it being like you have to get skinny for this dress, right?
Mhm.
Versus, oh, it's going to optimize my performance. And, in the last, I would say last month, I started exercising 2 to 3 times a week, yoga. Okay. We're not doing HIIT
Right?
yet.
No, that's good. That's
And
that's
I
good.
felt great. Like I was just more so proud of myself. Like even, when I was planking and my stomach was like sore the next day, I was like, I miss this feeling.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to just get there. I guess in my mind, I still associate such a time commitment and such a sacrifice with it that every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, okay, well, what do I have to trade off to do this? When it really just doesn't have to be that way. Now, I do want to ask you another question though, because I've been seeing a lot of jargon around inflammation diets, where it's, you know, you choose your food based on things that are not going to inflame you. And I thought that that was interesting because my husband, as I mentioned, and he's probably like, so you just talking about me the whole episode. My husband, he is a slim guy, always has been. But when we look back at pictures from when like we first got married, his face was super, super puffy, like swollen almost. And now he has like a very chiseled face, still very slim, but just his face looks different. And what changed was basically when high blood pressure runs in his family. And so we got into a car accident. And when we got to the hospital, it was like his blood pressure was through the roof. And they were like, listen, the accident may have caused this, but based on these numbers, this was already something here. And that accident was like a blessing in disguise, right? Like, so immediately we started changing our diet, cut out all fast foods with the exception of Chick-fil-A here and there. Shout out to Chick-fil-A. Because, you know, we think Chick-fil-A is healthy down here in the South. But we cut out pretty much every other thing. And, you know, we just don't cook with salt really at home at all. And I mean, his entire appearance has just changed. He doesn't have headaches anymore. And I noticed that with me, when I eat, you know, certain foods, I don't know if it's gluten that I'm eating or what, but like my eczema flares up. I feel like this is like a little bit swollen. What is this? My lymph nodes. So like what's the inflammation part of the diet and nutrition that's kind of impacting a lot of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think for your husband, on a side note, I think it's probably not inflammatory driven why he has depuffed. It's because he's gotten his hypertension under control. So he was probably retaining fluid in his face.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, you know, part of the problem with high blood pressure is we're actually retaining fluids, and that increases our blood pressure. So I don't know if he started a medication or, you know, just like really worked on his diet, but he was probably retaining fluid, which is why he was all puffy. But certainly, you know, when it comes to inflammation, having a puffy face, retaining fluid in the limbs, retaining fluid all around is a common symptom. Inflammation is the driving force of chronic disease and autoimmune disease, right? So it's hugely important to get your inflammation under control. And doing that with food is really, really powerful, specifically like anti-inflammatory foods, right? And so, you know, when we are in a state of inflammation, it throws off our hormones, it throws off our metabolism and metabolic processes, it throws off our cognition. I mean, some studies have found are starting to kind of come out talking about the connection between inflammation and depression. And so we know that it is having an impact on all of the tissues in our body, including our brain. So it's so incredibly important to get inflammation under control. You can't do it exclusively with food for everyone, but you certainly can try. And so it's a huge priority when you're thinking about your nutrition. You should absolutely consider the inflammatory piece of things. And the best way to work on, you know, an anti-inflammatory diet, so to speak, is to really focus on having a variety of produce in your diet, a variety of different colored fruits and vegetables, having high quality foods and limiting processed foods. Having good quality, healthy fats is really important. So like some key things that I recommend for people is making sure that you're getting all of the colors in a day, which was really hard to do, right? So making sure that you're getting a green, a yellow, an orange, a purple, right? A red when it comes to your produce. So, you know, not just having a salad with greens, making sure that you're adding in some purple cabbage, add in some red tomatoes, you know, also doing your best to kind of get good quality produce if it's accessible to you, I think is really important, right? If you can shop local, shop at a farmer's market, those foods, that produce, because of the way that it's grown, has more antioxidants in it. So you can get a bigger bang for your buck when you're shopping local. So that is really, really important. And then also leaning on like some healthy fats, like on the topic of keto, right? Like I think some people can do the ketogenic diet and just have like butter and cheese and cream, and kind of like lean on the like very high fat meats, right? But TBD, whether or not those are inflammatory. Some research says it is, some research says it isn't. But I think more importantly, we definitively do know that healthy fats like olive oil, plant-based fats, most plant-based fats are anti-inflammatory. Whether the non-plant-based fats are bad for us, we don't know yet. I think, everything in moderation, but, having olive oil on a regular basis, right? Having avocado, having salmon and the fatty fish is really important. Chia seeds, flax seeds. So having more of the healthy plant-based fats in the diet is really important too. So, really focusing on the produce and the variety of produce, all of those different colors are all different antioxidants. And so that's how you really combat inflammation in the body. And then, there's cutting things out too, right? The so-called inflammatory foods, right? So I think, that is something that I like to work with my clients on an individual basis. Some people are more sensitive to gluten and dairy than others. For example, some people with autoimmune disease, are more sensitive to gluten from a GI gut perspective, right? But others aren't. And so you don't need to cut out these foods without figuring out if you're sensitive to them. And I recommend doing that with a dietitian if you can, so you don't like go rogue. But certainly there are the inflammatory foods that we know are inflammatory are like the sugar, refined grains, and processed foods. You don't need to cut them out completely, but shifting the proportion of the amount that you're having in the diet is really important for inflammation. And then of course, lifestyle stuff, right? Stress, exercise, all of these things contribute to either decreasing inflammation or increasing inflammation. So kind of working on it from a more holistic perspective. I know that's a long answer, but there's a lot I have to say about this clearly.
And it's just, as I'm hearing you talk, I can imagine like someone and I'll just say this, I am very much into this, right? Even just as a, something that I study, because a part of my program is like, okay, across all of these different domains, how can we kind of use them to craft this life, right? So like nutrition and environment and stress and all of that stuff is just such a huge part beyond just like the productivity hacks, right? So I am very much into this, but everybody that listens to me is not into this, right? And so, but my goal is to let them get excited about these things that we can control. And so, for someone who maybe is not geeking out on like inflammation in whole foods right now, but they do want to be healthy and make healthier choices, this stuff can sound overwhelming, right? It's like, okay, how do I choose? And so, what does it look like just like in the day in the life of like, even for you, like when it comes to you making these great nutrition choices, like how do you go about your day? Do you shop once a week? Like prep meals? Do you know your blood type? Because I have a friend who's like, yeah, I was a vegan. Then I came to the, holistic doctor in Atlanta. She told me I need to eat more beef. And I'm like, oh, do I need to go see a holistic doctor? Anyway, so what does it look like in your life?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something for everyone. Also, the blood type diet, like totally not science-based, so don't even bother. I think there's something to be said. I mean, some people just don't do well on a plant-based diet, but that doesn't necessarily relate to your blood type. So don't read the book. Don't waste your time.
Ready here first, guys.
Don't waste your time. I think for me, I have a startup. I run a very busy company. I'm a new mom. So nutrition for me needs to be quick and easy, right? As I'm sure it is for many of you. I mean, you have 4 kids. I can't even imagine. I'm one and done. I can't do it. But they say that you get
so those hormones get regulated. And you're like,
yeah, that's what they say. Wait another 6 months and I'll be saying something else, right? So for me, what I eat is really like, I really practice what I preach, and I rely mostly on whole foods, although like I will have like some popcorn and quick and easy, like healthy snacks in my pantry. But for me, I think it's about like your taste preference, and it's about having a mix of things. Like if you don't like to cook, then find like a really great healthy meal delivery service that kind of does the work for you, right? Like invest in that, outsource that, so you can spend more time doing something that you do like to do while still supporting your nutrition, because it does have an impact on your productivity. Never skip a meal. I know that intermittent fasting is a thing, but it's really important for people to maintain their energy levels, to make sure that they're having consistent meals throughout the day, right? You want to stabilize your blood sugar. And if you're not eating until the afternoon and then binging through the evening, then you're going to be tired, and you're not going to have
How
good
do you make sure that you do that throughout the day?
Yeah, so I think leaning on some core things, right? So lean on quick and easy snacks that have protein and fiber. So even like today, I didn't have lunch, but I did have an apple with some cheese and some almond butter, right? And so that filled me up and has been keeping me satisfied, and it's quick and easy and I didn't have to cook anything, right? So the apple has the fiber, the water, the nutrients that makes me feel nice and full, and also supports my nutrition, my digestive tract. But then the healthy fats also helps me to feel full, right? And the protein from the cheese helps me to feel full. And so all of these foods are really like quick and easy. You don't have to cook them, but it's really about combining the protein-based foods with produce, and they can be plant-based protein. So you can have, hummus or beans and have that with produce. You can do a big batch on the weekends. I work from home, so I don't do that. But if you're someone who doesn't work from home and, just likes to have kind of everything done so you can just grab it and go, I usually recommend doing 2 batches a week so you don't spend your whole weekend like just slaving away in the kitchen. Yeah, it's like a lot of work. So like give yourself the weekends off and like try to fit in batch cooking in the evening when the kids go to bed, or if you have time during the day, if you're working from home, do it during your lunch hour. So that can be really, really helpful, right? Like you have to cook for your kids anyway. So, well, most of us do. Although you can outsource that. I know that it's so hard when you're navigating like parenthood and feeding your kids, and it's a lot. Like I, as a new mom, just experiencing it for the first time, like, oh, now I have to cook for someone else. It's a lot, right? And if you're already doing that work, I talk to so many moms. They're like, yeah, I cook these amazing, healthy, balanced meals for my kids, and then like I end up just like eating crap all day. I'm like, do yourself that favor by like adding yourself into the equation here. So take the time to cook for yourself if you want. If you don't want to, or you don't have the time, outsource, invest the money into the healthy foods, right? So have healthy snacks, have grab and go snacks, cheese, nuts, fruit. When in doubt, eggs, right? Like when in doubt, you can always lean on that stuff. So that I found, to get a rotisserie chicken, one and done, a rotisserie chicken and a salad bag, and you're good to go, right? Batch cook some quinoa or rice. Really kind of like batch cook easy things, I think can be really helpful. Like chili is like a staple in my house, right? The beans are pre-cooked. You don't have to worry about that. You get ground meat. You don't have to do anything with that, right? And you can just like add frozen vegetables if you want. And that's another big one. Like vegetables, frozen veggies are actually frozen at peak ripeness. So they sometimes even have more nutritional value than so-called fresh foods that are like being shipped from, a different country. So totally cool to have some frozen broccoli. I have frozen broccoli every single week. It's delicious. It's easy. You could also invest in like some hacks, like get yourself a slow cooker, a good quality blender, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I love that. You're making me hungry.
I
Yeah,
hear
I'm like, oh, some nuts and cheese right now would be really good.
you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I consider myself to be a foodie, because I like to, like, there's nothing I love more than like going out to eat and like kicking it with my girls. Like that is like my happy place. But I don't get to do that as much anymore because, obviously COVID, but also just like having the kids. And so I try to recreate the experience through like having these rituals. And so that was something that I read I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago in the Magnolia magazine, you know,
Love Joanna.
she's just
So
everything.
great.
But she was
She has
basically,
5 kids now, right? Or
yes,
6?
yes, 5. And she was just like, there are certain things that you don't like to do, just like turn it into a self-care ritual. And
Mhm.
so she, talked about, laundry, I think it was for her or something. And I think that at the time, just like cooking for my family and laundry were my thing, that I felt like was just like, oh, there's got to be better things for me to do with my time. But the truth is, it's like, we used to have a delivery service, and that stuff used to go bad too. Because at some point, you
Mhm.
just get tired of everything, right? And so the more cost effective thing was just like, okay, let's just buy, 2 or 3 meals at a time. But even had creating this ritual of like alone time, and I realized like, oh, if I cook dinner, I can actually escape because my husband does most of the cooking. And I figured out when I just recently started back cooking with after this pregnancy that it's an escape because the other parent has to watch the kids.
Yes,
And I was like, no
that's
wonder you like to cook and clean the kitchen because you can just tune us out. So I have definitely gotten back in the kitchen and I'm excited to explore this. I'm going to definitely have to set me up a session because I feel like the accountability of nutrition, getting my body back moving, like that's going to be just like really good. And as part of the YouTube channel, that's something that I'm doing too. It's like if I learn about something on the podcast, then I do kind of like a post or pre episode where I'm actually either using the product or doing the methodology. And I report back, like, okay, guys, this is what happened when I hired a dietitian. So,
yeah.
TBD, guys.
Yes, yes, we would love to support you. We take insurance too. So,
Good.
yeah,
I didn't
that
even know. I forgot that they cover that type of thing. I only thought that they covered if you get sick, but okay, that's
yeah,
helpful.
not a lot of dietitians take insurance, and I think it's a part of like a huge problem within this space. Like my co-founder Vanessa and I are really like passionate about making nutrition accessible for everyone, and that's why we take insurance as a company. And so like taking away the sort of elitist attitude around nutrition and being able to provide really high quality, evidence-based, science-based, personalized nutrition support for people and take insurance is like our at our core, like what we're really passionate about. So, talk about optimization, like optimize those benefits, girl. You're paying for it already.
No, that's right. That's so good because yeah, when we were talking, I was just like, is this going to be something that everybody can do, or they're going to be like, girl, I can't afford the food and the dietitian.
Yeah.
I love that mission. I think that's I love that so much. Well, this has been great. I think that this is just a timely conversation, especially as we get ready to go into the holidays. And I saw you post something yesterday about, how many people overate for Halloween. And I was like, girl, get out my business. Um,
No judgment. No judgment.
but it's just like we're getting into that season. And I remember one of my guy friends who is, one of my healthier friends, he was like, are you all really going to take all of the healthy habits we've formed and all of the work that we've done together in these challenges and stuff and ruin it on like one plate of food that y'all barely even like? And I was like, you know what? So much of Thanksgiving is just like a mental thing in terms of what it represents for the family. But like overdoing it for days is just not necessary anymore, you know?
Yeah, you nailed it with that one. I think going into the holidays, my biggest piece of advice is like balance, right? Like it's okay to overeat to the point where you're sick on Thanksgiving. If that's something that you want to do it, right? But it's not going to ruin anything. It's not going to undo anything, right? Like if you're doing the work most of the time, enjoy yourself, like have an indulgent meal. You can have an indulgent meal once a week if you want, right? Like the goal is sustainability here. Like I hate the 80/20 thing, but it's almost true, right? Like if you're doing the work most of the time, it's like going out and having an indulgent meal isn't really going to break the bank. It's about the small things that you do every single day that lead to success in wellness. And I'm sure in the work that you do too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for hopping on here. How can people find you and keep in touch with you and your company?
Yeah, well, thank you. It was so great chatting with you. I feel like there's so much to talk about. You can find me on Instagram at Tamar Samuels RD. You could also find Culina Health on Instagram at Culina Health is our handle, and culinahealth.com. As I said, we're a virtual nutrition company that takes insurance. So even if you don't live in the New York, New Jersey area, you may still be able to work with us. So you can find out more information about that on our website.
Wonderful. All right, guys. We'll definitely take advantage of this. We're getting ready to get into that weight loss goal season. So I know y'all are preparing, and there's going to be plenty of ads out there for every diet. I know Weight Watchers just did a whole free campaign.
Ah.
So, this could be a great opportunity for us to really just get educated on customized solutions. So I'm excited to hear about, the listeners who take advantage of this. So thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Alena.